guys, thanks for tuning in. It's finally that day. We're going to get the airbox on the ITBs on my E30. You know that I like using my cart as a kind of preview of what I'll be doing that day and making sure that I get all the parts on. So I'm going to load my cart up with the airbox, Plenum, and get ready to dig into it. There were a few things that I needed to kind of figure out first. Thanks to one of the viewers, they pointed out that I was missing an O-ring on the throttle bodies, both the front and the back side. So I had to go through and remove those from the car and put the O-rings on and get that properly installed. Of course, because you're taking off and putting back on the throttle bodies, they need to get resynced. So here I am kind of going through that process again, just making sure everything's in line and as it should be.
So there's not a lot of room below this last spacer for the bolt on the bottom, and it always seems to be one of the areas that I struggle with getting all the parts on and off. And then you can see here there's clearly a space for an O-ring to go on. One of the fun things about the E30 for me is this little corner where I keep a lot of the bolts and tools that I'm working on. I think it's handy to have it nearby. And you can see here, we have all of the throttle bodies back on with the O-rings installed.
It's not a good project car unless you start piling things on it. So after having the E30 sit for a little bit, you can see that it started to blend into the garage and just start to be a bit of a storage shelf. But we'll get that cleaned off and start progressing in getting the airbox and plenum on. Everything should bolt up relatively easily. There will be, I think, 2 or 3 things that I'll need to figure out. The main one is going to be getting a hole cut in the backing shield, which is where I'm going to run the idle control valve hose. So some of those vacuum hoses will need to get routed to the airbox. I think in the instructions they recommend that you could either put it through the actual carbon fiber plenum part or the metal backing shield, and I feel a lot more comfortable drilling holes into that, so that's where I'm going to run the line. I think later down the road I might try to make a carbon fiber backing plate just to make everything more of a cohesive look, but we'll see if I can get to that. So yeah, with that, let's start digging into it. So the instructions recommend doing this out of the car, I guess, to get a better angle of tightening the bolts on there. When I first laid these out, I had them way more spaced out. I guess I forgot how small the M20 is, but I probably had it an extra 6 or 8 inches longer than what it needed to be. So we'll shrink it back up and get the plate mounted on. So we'll have the spacers sitting there, and then all of our trumpets will go on. One of the very first videos I did on these, I put, I guess, the brackets on it. So to get the trumpets actually onto the spacers with the backing plate, I'm going to set those on there. There are threads in these brackets that we already put on, and there's no threads in the spacers. So I'll run the bolts up through that into the trumpets, and then we'll get these tightened down. It does say only keep them loose for right now, and then once it's in the car, tighten it all the way up. We'll get all of these bolted up finger tight, and then get the plenum on top, and then we'll install it all back into the car. And then we'll mark up the hole for where we want to put kind of the idle control valve tubing, vacuum hosing, and then we'll be one step closer. cushion for the carbon. Not trying to scratch it up this early into owning it.
Some of the bolt holes in the backing plate didn't necessarily line up perfectly with the plenum, so off camera I did drill out some of the holes to make it fit on better. My drill bits weren't quite big enough to fit, so eventually I did buy a step bit to make the hole the perfect size for the little pass-through that I was given. And just to fit in the dipstick, I did have to push it a little bit. It bent pretty easily, and I just pushed it towards, I guess, the valve cover, and it fit into the space as needed. And you can see there really isn't a lot of room against the firewall. I have my engine harness kind of tucked below it, and then with the plenum on, we are very close to the brake booster. There is one other thing I'd like to say about the order of kind of operations of getting the airbox on. I've had the spacers and the trumpets on and off with or without the backing plate multiple times trying to figure this out. As you saw in one of the earlier clips, I did have the backing plate on with the trumpets attached to the engine, but at that point the plenum does not fit over the trumpets and in between the brake booster, so everything had to come back off. The plenum was then attached firmly to the backing plate, and the spacers to trumpet bolts were kept loose because that gives you a little bit of adjustment to make sure that the spacers are able to line up with the throttle bodies. You get the throttle body to spacer connection tight, then you go ahead and get the spacer to trumpet connection tight, and then at that point all the bolts should be on there tight and you should be good to go.
Before I get the plenum bolted on, I just want to get one sound clip of what it's going to sound like without anything on it, and then I'll throw the plenum on and we'll get a sound clip of what it sounds like with the plenum on. I don't know if it's going to make a difference, but here's the evidence. There you go. The airbox is finally on. The ITBs are at this point, I guess, fully assembled and installed onto my E30. The only thing left to do now is to drive and keep tuning it. I think the tuning will take quite some time, but I do have kind of a good tune already in there that I was running with the open trumpets, I guess. Was able to drive around pretty good. I have it well tuned up until about 40 miles an hour. Any more load than that, it starts to bog down, so do some tuning with Mega Squirt and probably the auto tune feature just to get it driving around and record some logs and tweak where I can. But I'm thrilled that the plenum and everything is fully in and ready to go. I was going to add in an old kind of carbon fiber air filter cage that I have, but right now it just doesn't really fit with the ABS module in there, so I have to find another option. But I think right now and how often I drive it, it should be fine just having the plenum open as it is. I might look to get a open filter just kind of as a safety measure for now before I can get something that's a little bit more appealing to put in the engine bay. But yeah, thanks for coming along for the ride, and I'm glad that everything is good to go now. Keep an eye out for some more videos. I'll be driving it, getting a driving impression of it, taking the car out for some photography at different sites, and then once the autocross season starts up, I'll be there running the car at autocross. So don't forget to subscribe and like. And I hope you've enjoyed watching along with me getting the ITBs installed in my car.